All right, folks, welcome to the last installment of our data processing video to get you ready to analyze your CAP survey data in R. You'll remember at the end of last video, we had finished up recoding all of our knowledge, attitudes, and practices data into individual 0-1 codes to produce unified knowledge scores for each respondent, as well as knowledge and practices categories. But our data at this point is still very much not ready to go into R. So what we're going to do is talk about how we're going to go about getting that data R ready. So what I'm going to do is what I oftentimes have been sharing with you that I like to do, which is creating multiple checkpoints for myself so that I can keep track of the decisions that I've made and have a place to go back to if I end up making a mistake. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all of my data. I'm going to copy it over here, and then I'm going to go to a brand new data sheet and I'm going to paste that data in. And at this point, we're used to it looking kind of ugly when I first pasted in, so I'm going to get that fixed real quick. Here we go, if I can do this. All right, so now that we've got our data copied and pasted over into a new spreadsheet so that I don't have to worry about mucking anything up, let's talk about what we still need to do to get this data ready to go into R. So a couple things have to get changed. First thing that we want to talk about is our column headers. When we read data into R, those spaces cannot be maintained. So for example, if I've got my column header, highest space, level, space, so on and so forth of parental education, we can't leave any of those spaces in there, right? Because R will read those incorrectly. It'll goof up the way R interprets the data that we read in. Same thing is true down here for things like graduate space education or our monetary value. So we're going to need to have all of those edited out to make sure that R can correctly process our data. So one of the first things that I like to do is think about how I'm going to recode each of my column names. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy over my column names, and just like we made our coding key, I'm going to make a variable key. So I'm going to go ahead and just get this taken care of here. All right. And what I'm going to do here is decide how I'm going to call each one of these variables in R. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a column and call this over here R variable name. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is give myself this key so that I will know what every single one of my renamed R variables are. In addition to just taking out the spaces, I also strongly recommend making them less clunky, right? So for example, if a malaria vaccine was recommended by a healthcare provider, would you choose to receive it? That's a lot to have to type in if you're just trying to do a chi-squared analysis, for example, in R. So what we want to do is not only get rid of the punctuation issues and the space issues, but we also want to simplify our variable names. Now, R is case sensitive, so my default is to just make everything lowercase when I'm dealing with variables in R so that I don't have to worry about missing capitalization. So let's go ahead and think about how we can do some of these things. We want our variables to be meaningful but simple so that we still generally can reflect what our variables mean. So for example, for highest level of parental education, I would probably just go with parental underscore education. Or we could even make it simpler and do parental edu. That underscore lets me differentiate between words without having the issues associated with the space. Super easy. Household income of guardians, if not financially independent, can turn into income. Income. Super duper easy. Do you plan to have children in the future? Can become children. That simple. So that's all we're doing here. There is no single right or wrong way to do this. In some cases, you'll see people recommending not using any sort of meaningful name and just doing something like variable one, variable two, etc. Because if you have this key to remind you what variable one and two are, well, then you know what they are when you're doing your analysis. I don't prefer that method because I like to be able to have an idea of what I'm doing without referring to a key because I think I'm less likely to get mixed up that way. So I'm going to go ahead and process this data by creating brief but meaningful category headers for each one of our variables. Now, again, you don't need to watch me do all of this. I'll come in with a couple recommendations, but generally after I give you my tips, I'm going to go ahead and just pause the video and get it all taken care of. Now, for our knowledge and practices questions, the way that I've got this set up for you is generally pretty good. So I'm probably going to call all of my Lyme symptoms LS, and I'll actually do that under lowercase LS underscore, and then whatever the symptom is. So like in this case, LS rash, whereas this one will be LS underscore drooping, and so on and so forth with that. Same thing here with transmission. I'll probably call this, for example, LT for Lyme transmission, air, and then move on like that for all of these different options. For knowledge score, I'll probably just call one of those straight up knowledge, and the other one, no, I'll go no cat for knowledge category. Okay, so that gives you the big gist here of what we're doing here with our renaming. Key takeaways: no spaces, ideally no punctuation other than those underscores. You can do capital letters if you want, but know that R is case sensitive. So if you choose to have a capitalization in your variable names, know that you will have to match that capitalization throughout your analysis. Okay, I'm going to briefly pause this because you do not need to watch me rename all of these things, and then we'll come back together. Okay, so during that pause, I just went ahead and I added our category names for all of these variables, as you can see when I'm scrolling across. And this is now going to become, and I'll rename this sheet now, my R variable key. And so I'm going to save this to make sure that I know exactly what I renamed every single variable. So if I want to know what the variable children means, I can go back to this R variable key and say, ah, that was how I called the do you plan to have children at any point in the future variable. Cool. So at this point, for every single column that I want to end up in my R spreadsheet, I now have a new name for them. Now all I have to do is go back to that sheet where I have all of my data, and since I have exactly maintained those columns, what I can do now is highlight my R variable name. Whoops, did the wrong thing there. Let me go ahead and do a little Control Z. I can highlight my R variable name row until I've got all of them highlighted. And now I'm just going to go ahead and copy. So copy. And then I'm going to head over here and I'm going to paste. And now I've got all of my column headers appropriately pasted in for when I'm going to get that data into R. Now, a couple things that you might notice here. One, this column here does not have a column header. This was our unified question that reflected participants' original responses to those questions that we then broke out into these individual columns. We don't want this column to go into R, so now is actually the appropriate time to delete it. So let's go ahead and delete that. And there's one more that's like that over here that again is just participants' total responses to one of those knowledge questions. We're going to go ahead and delete that now because we don't want it going into R. So at this point, all of our column headers are appropriately formatted, and the only thing that we have to deal with now are our individual column options that are not yet in a form that R can handle. Now, conveniently for us, since we already recoded all of these variables as numeric or categories, they're already ready to go. We don't have to do anything with those. So the only variables that we potentially have to deal with are some of our socio-demographic ones. So what we're going to do is go over a quick and easy way to think about each one of those variables. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and actually first I'm going to go ahead and sort our data like we talked about. Now, when we've sorted data before, I've shown you how to go to the data tab, like I'm going there and then click on sort. There's also another way to do that without clicking on that data tab. I can just right click and then go down to sort, and I can go to custom sort to pull up that window that I want there. And I can tell it that I want to sort based on parental education. And what that's going to do is organize all of those responses for me. Now, some of those, like college, that's already a single word with no spaces, so I don't have to change anything about that. But for responses like elementary space school or graduate space education, I do need to change that. So what we're going to do is think about how we can do that. Now, since we have only one respondent for elementary school, the way that I'm going to change that is just by deleting that second word. For graduate education, since we have quite a few of those, what I'm going to do is use that same trick we talked about before, where I'm going to highlight all of the items that I want to change. And then I'm going to do that Control H, which is the find and replace function. So I just hit Control H for find and replace. And what I'm going to tell it to search for is graduate education. And then I'm going to tell it to replace that with just the word graduate, because that means graduate education. So I'm going to say replace all. Now, you could also, if you wanted to, we could do, for example, to make this super clear, I could tell it, all right, instead of just graduate, let's go ahead and make it super clear what that category means and call it graduate edu education. And that might be a little bit clearer, but either way, as long as you know what it is, it works. High school is one word, that doesn't need to be replaced. Middle school is 2 words, so we're going to go ahead and delete that second word school there. So now we've only got 1 value per cell. And just like that, we're taken care of here. The next column that we want to look at is a little bit trickier, right? Where we've got income here as a range. What we want to do is make sure that we have this expressed in ways that are in no way challenging for R to interpret. Now, you'll notice there's some fluff here in the answers in some cases, in that we don't need the word annually. We know that that's what the question was. So what we have to do then is decide how we want to get this sorted out. So once again, let's go ahead and sort our data based on that column so that we can remember what our answer options were. And we're going to go ahead and do custom sort again. I'm going to tell it I want to sort by income, and then we're going to give it that option. Okay, so we've got several different options here, and I'm going to go ahead and make a new column so I can think about how I want to process income. We've got 10 to 30,000 annual, 30 to 70, so on and so forth, all the way up to more than 120, and quite a few prefer not to answers. So a really easy way to recode prefer not to answer is to just say NA, no answer or not applicable. So we're going to recode that as NA, they didn't provide us with any data. Easy. Now all we have to do then is think about how we want to recode the rest of these. Now, there's a couple different ways that we could potentially do this. I'm going to go ahead and just use words and say 10 to underscore 30. And that way I'm going to know that that means 10 to 30,000 annually. So now I'm going to go ahead and scroll down for all the people who are in that 10 to 30. Then I'm going to do 30, excuse me, to 70. And apologies that you have to listen to me talk while I'm typing. And I'm going to scroll that down. And all I'm going to do for every single one of those categories is that exact same process until I've got a code that tells me what all of those mean. And we'll talk about recording that coding here in just a minute. I am going to pause so you don't have to watch me do all of that because it would be very redundant, and then we'll come back together. Okay, so I've gone through and recoded all of those income responses to R-ready categories that don't, in this case, have any capitals, don't have any spaces, and have underscores. I have maintained meaning there, like we talked about, but importantly, another thing that I've done, over on my second sheet in this file, I've also given myself those original income responses and my R income code, so that if I do get confused at any point about what that means, no problem, I can refer back to this R coding sheet. Okay, so now that I've got that taken care of, I'm going to go ahead and delete this column since, again, it's not formatted properly for R. And now I'm left only with a properly formatted income column. Now, the children column is already good to go because all we've got is yes, no, and unsure, easy peasy. Malaria vaccine is yes, no, and unsure. That's super easy. And then our West Nile virus vaccine, we've also got yeses and nos. I don't know is the same thing as unsure. So if we want to just maintain that formatting from our malaria question, we can go ahead really quickly and just sub out all of the I don't knows for unsures. So the way that we're going to do that is the same way that we've been doing it, where I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that whole West Nile virus column, and then I'm going to do that find and replace function, where I'm going to tell it, I want you to find I don't know, and I want you to replace it with unsure. And we're going to do a replace all and easy. It's all taken care of. Okay, so at this point, we now have an R-ready data sheet. We've got all of our variables correctly named. We have only variables that R can correctly interpret. We don't have any extra or unnecessary variables. So we are pretty much at this point ready to go. So the only thing that we have left to consider then is making sure that we've got our file in a format that R can actually read. Right now, I'm processing all of this in Excel, and so this would be an XLSX file for me since I have a PC. If you've got a Mac, it would be a numbers file. R can't read either of those things, so what we have to do is save this file into a .csv format. Now, before we talk about saving it into a CSV format, the first thing that we want to do though is save it as, if you're a PC person, .slxs, just in Excel format, or a numbers format. And the reason that's critical is because CSV, or comma separated values files, cannot support multiple sheets. So if I just try to save this directly as a CSV file and not an Excel or numbers file, I would lose all of the information that I have over here about how I've recoded those variable names. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just go ahead and save this as it is, and I'm going to go to more options here so that I can pick where I want to save it. Let's see, my data processing files, that's where I want to go, and I'm going to say R ready data file. And I'm just going to save that as an Excel workbook. And it'll take a second, easy. Now all I'm going to do is go ahead and copy all of this over. So I just copied that data. I'm going to open a new workbook and I'm going to paste it over. And this is now my data sheet that I'm going to be ready to get into R. So the last thing that we have to do then is save that as a CSV file. So I'm going to go to Save As, More Options, and we're going to do two things here now. So first thing, let's go ahead and rename it. And I'm going to call it cap underscore survey underscore data. Okay, so make sure that your file name is also R friendly with underscores. Then I'm going to click my Save As Type. And under Save As Type, I'm going to go up here to CSV UTF-8 parentheses, comma, delimited. So that's going to give it that .csv label. Now, I strongly recommend that you save this file directly to your working directory. So I'm going to go up to my documents, click on that, and I'm going to go down to our directory, and I'm going to save this as cap survey data. And at that point, I've now got this CSV file saved in my working directory that, boom, I can get into R and immediately start doing my relevant analyses. Now, on that data processing worksheet, I've got a variety of prompts in there to help you think about which variables you'll need to use to answer your research questions and the appropriate tests to run in those variables. All of that practicing that we've done so far with vibe coding for correlation, for regression, for t-test, for ANOVA, for Tukey's tests, for chi-squared, all of that has been directly to prepare you for this portion of our project. You're going to vibe code in the exact same way that you've been doing it with your chatbot. So tell it how your data is organized. Tell it what your column headers are called. Tell it the specific analysis that you wanted to do and what each of your category options are. And then just have that conversation back and forth, coding in an iterative way with the help of that chatbot. Okay, that is the very end of our data processing unit. So hopefully you'll get some really interesting results. I'm so excited to hear what you all find out about, and I will see you all later. Have a good one, everybody.